In a quiet valley between rolling green hills and a winding silver river stood a small cottage with a slanted roof and ivy climbing its stone walls. The windows were framed with white curtains that fluttered gently in the breeze, and in the yard grew lavender, thyme, and a stubborn little rose bush. Inside the cottage lived a widow named Mrs. Eloin and her two daughters, Beatrice and Leela. Beatrice, the elder, was known throughout the valley for her beauty. Her hair was dark and glossy, her posture graceful, and her eyes sharp like polished glass. She carried herself as though she were meant for grand halls and golden chandeliers, rather than a humble cottage by the river. Their mother adored her endlessly. Every word Beatrice spoke, even the unkind ones, were praised as clever. Every complaint was excused. Every selfish act was forgiven. Leela, the younger daughter, was different in every way. She had inherited her late father's warm brown eyes and quiet smile. There was a softness about her, not weakness, but gentleness. She wore plain dresses stitched carefully at the seams. While Beatrice admired herself in mirrors, Leela swept the floors, cooked meals, and washed clothes in cold river water. Leela also tended the small herb garden behind the house. Mrs. Eloin rarely thanked Leela. Instead, she would say, "Work quietly. Dreams do not feed a family." Leela would simply nod. Though she carried the weight of the household, she never allowed bitterness to take root in her heart. In the early mornings, before anyone else awoke, she would step outside and watch the sun rise over the hills. She believed that no matter how harsh people could be, the world itself still held beauty. One late afternoon in early autumn, heavy clouds gathered over the valley. The wind had a chill, and the cottage half crackled softly. Mrs. Eloin lifted the kettle and frowned. "There is no water left. Leela, take the large clay jug and fetch fresh water from the old spring beyond the willow grove. And do not dawdle. The old spring was nearly a mile away." The path leading to it twisted through tall grass, crossed over uneven stones, and dipped into a small wooded hollow where shadows lingered. Leela wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, lifted the heavy jug, and stepped onto the path. The wind tugged at her dress, and fallen leaves crunched beneath her feet. The sky darkened slowly as she walked. By the time she reached the spring, her arms trembled from carrying the weight. The water there was clear and cold, bubbling gently over smooth rocks. She knelt and lowered the bucket, filling her jug carefully. As she stood to leave, she heard a soft voice behind her. "My dear child, might you spare a little water for someone weary from travel?" Leela turned. An old woman stood a few steps away, leaning heavily on a wooden staff. Her cloak was worn thin, her hair silver and tangled by the wind. Her eyes, however, held something unusual, something watchful. "Of course," Leela said immediately. She set her heavy jug down, rinsed her small cup thoroughly, and filled it with the clearest water from the spring. "Please sit," she added gently. "The stones are cold." The old woman drank slowly, her hands shaking. Leela waited patiently, saying nothing. "Few young people," the woman said at last, "would stop to help a stranger without hesitation. Kindness costs nothing," Leela replied softly. "And everyone grows thirsty." The air around them seemed to shift. The wind stilled, The old woman straightened slowly. The wrinkles on her face softened. Her cloak shimmered as if woven with moonlight. Before Leela stood not a fragile traveler, but a radiant fairy, glowing faintly against the gathering dusk. "You have shown goodness without seeking reward," the fairy said. "From this day forward, every word you speak shall reveal the treasure within your heart." Leela blinked in confusion. "I do not understand." But as she spoke, a tiny luminous pearl slipped from her lips and landed at her feet. The fairy smiled. "May your kindness shine for all to see." And in an instant, she vanished like mist. Shaken and bewildered, Leela lifted her jug and hurried home. When she entered the cottage, Beatrice sighed dramatically. "You move like winter," she said. "Were you waiting for the moon to rise?" "I am sorry," Leela began, and as the words left her mouth, a delicate white flower fell gently onto the wooden floor. Silence filled the room. Then another pearl dropped. Then a small sapphire. Then a cascade of shimmering blossoms. Mrs. Eloin gasped and dropped the ladle from her hand. "What is this?" she whispered, as Leela tried to explain what had happened at the spring. Every gentle sentence she spoke sent more jewels and flowers tumbling down. Pearls rolled beneath the table. Silver petals scattered near the hearth. Beatrice stared, her face pale with envy. Mrs. Eloin quickly fell to her knees, scooping the treasures into her apron. "Tell me everything," she demanded. When Leela finished, the floor glittered like a royal treasury. That night, Mrs. Eloin did not sleep. Her mind burned with possibilities. At dawn, she shook Beatrice awake. "You will go to the spring today. Do exactly as your sister did. Speak sweetly, be polite, and bring back the same blessing." Beatrice disliked the very idea. The thought of walking a dusty path and fetching water like a servant irritated her deeply. But the memory of the glittering jewels hardened her resolve. She dressed in her finest ribbon and marched toward the spring. The journey annoyed her from the start. The wind tangled her hair. The hem of her dress brushed against dirt. She muttered complaints the entire way. When she reached the spring, she bent to fill the jug. Before she could stand, a tall, elegant lady appeared beside her. This time, the fairy wore the appearance of nobility, her gown flowing like silk. "Good morning," the lady said calmly. "Might I have a sip of water?" Beatrice frowned. "Draw it yourself," she replied sharply. "I did not walk all this way to serve strangers." "You would deny water to someone in need?" the lady asked. "I deny foolishness," Beatrice snapped. The air grew cold. "Then your words shall reveal what lives within you." Beatrice rolled her eyes and lifted her jug, dismissing the encounter entirely. When she reached home, Mrs. Eloin rushed toward her. "Well, what happened?" "That ridiculous woman." A slimy toad dropped from Beatrice's mouth onto the floor. She screamed. Another followed. Then a writhing snake slithered across the wooden boards. Every angry word she spoke brought more creatures spilling from her lips. Mrs. Eloin shrieked in horror. "Stop talking," she cried. But Beatrice's panic only made it worse. Toads hopped across the table. Snakes coiled near the door. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering in fear. In her humiliation and rage, Mrs. Eloin turned on Leela. "This is your fault. You brought this curse upon us." Leave this house at once." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "I never meant harm," she said gently. As she spoke, pearls and white lilies fell onto the grass. But her mother would not listen. Heartbroken, Lila walked down the dusty road, carrying nothing but the clothes she wore. The sky darkened as evening approached. She walked without direction, her tears falling quietly. Not far from the crossroads, a grand carriage approached, drawn by powerful white horses. Inside sat a young nobleman returning from the capital. When he saw a young woman walking alone at dusk, he ordered the carriage to stop. "Are you lost?" he asked kindly. "Only without a home," Lila replied softly. A trail of luminous blossoms fell at her feet. The nobleman stared in amazement. He listened as she told her story. With every word, jewels and flowers fell not in excess, but gently, beautifully. But what struck him most was not the magic. It was her calm voice, her forgiveness, her lack of bitterness. "Come with me," he said at last. "You deserve safety." Lila hesitated only a moment before accepting. At his family estate overlooking golden fields, she was welcomed with curiosity and wonder. Servants whispered about her gift, but soon they saw something greater. Whenever Lila spoke, quarrels softened, worries eased, laughter grew lighter. Her treasure built schools, repaired roads, fed the hungry, but more than jewels, she gave compassion. Months later, the nobleman stood beside her beneath flowering trees. "Will you remain here not as a guest, but as my equal?" Lila smiled through tears. "Yes," she whispered. A cascade of radiant blossoms fell round them. Years passed. The valley flourished under her influence. Children were taught kindness. The poor were sheltered. The air itself seemed warmer. Back at the riverside cottage, Beatrice's curse worsened. No one dared speak to her darknesses. Eloin's greed turned to regret, but regret could not undo cruelty. And so the tale spread across villages and kingdoms alike. A bitter heart reveals bitterness. A generous heart reveals treasure. For in the end, it is not magic that changes destiny, it is character. And whatever we carry inside us will, sooner or later, fall into the world for all to see.